What if I told you that Carl Jung, the greatest psychologist in history, discovered something about marijuana that could completely revolutionize your spiritual journey? Something so powerful it was censored for decades? Have you ever wondered why certain plants awaken states of consciousness that connect us to deeper dimensions of reality? Why millions of people around the world report profound mystical experiences with cannabis? Jung had a controversial theory about this. Prepare to discover the hidden secrets that traditional science doesn't want you to know. In this video, I'll reveal how Jung interpreted the relationship between sacred plants and the awakening of consciousness, the archetypal patterns that emerged during these experiences, and why he believed certain substances were portals to the collective unconscious. Warning: what you're about to discover may forever change your perception of spirituality, consciousness, and the true potential of the human mind. This knowledge was kept under lock and key, but today, finally, it's your time to know the truth. 1. The secret Jung hid about sacred plants. Carl Jung never spoke publicly about what he really thought of cannabis and other sacred plants, but his private journals tell a completely different story. Behind closed doors, Jung was fascinated by how these plants could unlock parts of the human mind that seemed impossible to reach through traditional therapy alone. In his secret writings, Jung described what he called plant teachers, substances that could bypass the ego's defensive walls and take people straight into the depths of their unconscious mind. He believed that cannabis wasn't just a recreational drug, but a key that could open doors to spiritual realms that most people never even knew existed. Jung noticed something incredible during his research. Patients who had used cannabis often described experiences that matched perfectly with ancient spiritual texts and mythologies from cultures around the world. They would talk about meeting divine beings, experiencing cosmic unity, and understanding truths about existence that seemed to come from somewhere beyond their normal thinking mind. This wasn't random hallucination, Jung realized. These people were accessing what he called the collective unconscious, the shared spiritual database of all human experience. Cannabis seemed to act like a bridge between the personal mind and this vast ocean of universal wisdom. But why did Jung keep this knowledge secret? The answer lies in the times he lived in. The early 20th century was not ready for a respected psychiatrist to openly discuss the spiritual benefits of cannabis. His reputation and career would have been destroyed overnight. So he coded his discoveries in complex psychological language and hid his real findings in private notes that wouldn't be discovered until decades after his death. Jung understood that cannabis worked by dissolving the barriers that normally separate our conscious mind from deeper layers of awareness. When someone uses cannabis in the right way, with the right intention, it can temporarily shut down the ego's constant chatter and allow access to profound spiritual insights. He observed that cannabis experiences often followed predictable patterns that matched what mystics and shamans had described for thousands of years. Users would first feel their normal sense of self becoming softer and more flexible. Then they would begin to perceive connections and meanings that were invisible in ordinary consciousness. Finally, many would experience what Jung called numinous encounters, direct contact with spiritual forces or archetypal beings. Jung was particularly interested in how cannabis could accelerate the individuation process, his term for the psychological journey toward wholeness and self-realization. He noticed that people who used cannabis mindfully often made breakthrough discoveries about themselves that would normally take years of therapy to uncover. The secret Jung discovered was that cannabis doesn't create these spiritual experiences out of nothing. Instead, it reveals what was already there, hidden beneath layers of social conditioning and mental noise. The plant simply removes the filters that normally block our access to higher consciousness. Jung also realized that cannabis experiences were not just personal healing journeys, but could connect people to transpersonal wisdom that transcended individual psychology. Users would often return from their experiences with knowledge about universal truths, cosmic principles, and spiritual laws that they had never studied or learned about through normal means. Perhaps most importantly, Jung discovered that cannabis could serve as a direct channel to what he called the self, the highest aspect of human consciousness that connects us to the divine. Through cannabis, people could experience themselves not just as separate individuals, but as expressions of a universal creative force. This secret knowledge explains why cannabis has been considered sacred by spiritual traditions throughout history. Jung realized that ancient cultures weren't just getting high for fun. They were using these plants as tools for religious communion and spiritual development. Today, as cannabis becomes legal in more places around the world, Jung's hidden insights are finally starting to make sense to mainstream science. Researchers are discovering that cannabis can indeed facilitate profound spiritual experiences, enhance empathy and compassion, and help people access states of consciousness that feel deeply meaningful and transformative. Jung's secret wasn't just about cannabis itself, but about the fundamental nature of consciousness and spirituality. He understood that the human mind contains infinite depths of wisdom and connection, and that certain plants could serve as keys to unlock these hidden treasures. This knowledge was too revolutionary for his time, but perhaps now we're finally ready to understand what Jung really discovered about the spiritual potential of sacred plants. 2. Why your mind expands with cannabis. When cannabis enters your system, something remarkable happens to your brain that goes far beyond just feeling relaxed or happy. Jung understood that cannabis creates a unique neurological state that allows your mind to break free from its normal patterns and limitations. Your brain normally operates like a well-organized highway system, with thoughts traveling along established routes and neural pathways. Cannabis acts like a traffic controller that temporarily changes all the signals, allowing your thoughts to take completely new paths and make connections that would be impossible under normal circumstances. Jung observed that this mental expansion happens because cannabis quiets down what he called the directed thinking mind, the part of consciousness that's always judging, analyzing, and trying to control everything. When this critical voice becomes softer, your awareness naturally opens up to receive information from deeper, more intuitive sources. The expansion you feel isn't just imagination or wishful thinking. Cannabis actually increases communication between different regions of your brain that don't normally talk to each other very much. Your creative right brain starts having conversations with your logical left brain. Your emotional centers connect with your rational thinking areas. Parts of your mind that have been isolated for years suddenly start working together as a team. This is why people often have profound insights while using cannabis. Your brain is literally making new connections and seeing patterns that were invisible before. Problems that seemed impossible to solve suddenly have obvious solutions. Relationships and situations in your life start making sense in ways you never noticed before. Jung discovered that cannabis expansion works by dissolving what psychologists call cognitive rigidity, the tendency for your mind to get stuck in the same thought patterns over and over again. Most people live their entire lives thinking in circles, replaying the same mental habits and never breaking free from limiting beliefs about themselves and reality. Cannabis temporarily lifts you out of these mental ruts and gives you a bird's-eye view of your own thinking processes. You can suddenly see how your mind works, notice patterns that were completely unconscious before, and make changes that seemed impossible when you were trapped inside your normal way of thinking. The expansion also happens because cannabis enhances what Jung called primary process thinking, the kind of fluid, symbolic, dreamlike awareness that connects you to deeper wisdom. Instead of thinking in straight lines and logical sequences, your mind starts thinking in images, feelings, and intuitive knowing that comes from beyond your rational understanding. This expanded state allows you to access information from what Jung called the collective unconscious, the vast database of human wisdom and experience that exists beyond individual memory. Many people describe feeling connected to ancient knowledge, universal truths, or spiritual insights that seem to come from a source much larger than their personal mind. Cannabis expansion also works by changing your relationship with time and space. Your normal sense of being a separate individual located at a specific point in time starts to become more fluid and flexible. You might feel connected to past and future versions of yourself, or experience a sense of unity with everything around you. Jung understood that this expansion isn't just a temporary high, but can create lasting changes in how your brain works. Each time you experience this expanded state of consciousness, you're creating new neural pathways and strengthening connections that can remain active even after the cannabis effects wear off. The key to understanding why your mind expands with cannabis is recognizing that expanded consciousness isn't something foreign or artificial that the plant adds to your experience. Instead, cannabis reveals the natural, expansive capacity of human awareness that's normally hidden beneath layers of mental conditioning and social programming. Your mind is already infinite and connected to universal consciousness. Cannabis simply removes the barriers that usually keep you from experiencing this truth. It's like cleaning a dirty window. The light was always there, but now you can finally see it clearly. Jung realized that cannabis expansion works because it temporarily returns your consciousness to its natural state of openness, curiosity, and connection. The narrow, fearful, separated way of thinking that most people consider normal is actually the result of psychological conditioning, not the true nature of human consciousness. When cannabis allows your mind to expand, you're not becoming something different from who you really are. You're remembering who you've always been, underneath all the mental limitations and social conditioning. This is why cannabis experiences often feel so familiar and true, even when they're completely unlike ordinary consciousness. 3. The hidden symbols that appear when high. During cannabis experiences, your mind begins to speak in a completely different language. The ancient language of symbols, images, and archetypal patterns that Jung spent his entire career studying. These aren't random hallucinations or meaningless mental noise, but profound communications from the deepest layers of your consciousness. Jung discovered that when people use cannabis, they often start seeing the same symbolic patterns that appear in myths, dreams, and spiritual traditions from around the world. These universal symbols emerge because cannabis allows you to tap into what Jung called the collective unconscious, the shared symbolic vocabulary of all human experience. One of the most common symbols that appears during cannabis experiences is the mandala, circular patterns that represent wholeness, unity, and the integration of all aspects of yourself. People often see these geometric patterns with their eyes closed, or notice them in everyday objects like flowers, clouds, or even the way light reflects off surfaces. Jung understood that these mandala visions were signs that your consciousness was moving toward greater psychological balance and spiritual integration. Another frequent symbolic experience is encountering what Jung called archetypal figures, universal characters that represent different aspects of human nature. You might meet a wise old man or woman who offers guidance, encounter a divine mother figure who provides comfort and nurturing, or face a shadow figure that represents parts of yourself you've been avoiding or denying. These archetypal encounters aren't just imagination or fantasy. Jung realized that they represent real psychological forces that live within your unconscious mind. Cannabis simply makes these usually invisible aspects of yourself visible and accessible, allowing you to have conscious conversations with parts of your psyche that normally operate below the level of awareness. Many people also experience powerful animal symbolism during cannabis journeys. You might feel connected to the strength of a lion, the wisdom of an eagle, the playfulness of a dolphin, or the groundedness of a bear. Jung understood that these animal spirits represent instinctual wisdom and natural qualities that modern civilization has taught us to ignore or suppress. Plant symbolism is another common theme that appears during cannabis experiences. People often feel deep connections to trees, flowers, or other plants and receive messages about growth, cycles of death and rebirth, and the interconnectedness of all life. Jung saw this plant consciousness as evidence that cannabis could connect us to what he called the vegetative unconscious, the ancient wisdom that plants have accumulated over millions of years of evolution. Water symbols frequently appear during cannabis journeys, often representing the flow of emotions, the cleansing of old patterns, or the return to a more fluid and natural way of being. You might see yourself swimming in an ocean of consciousness, floating down a river of time, or drinking from a sacred well of wisdom. Fire symbols often represent transformation, passion, and the burning away of old limitations. People might see themselves surrounded by purifying flames, feel their consciousness expanding like a blazing sun, or witness the destruction of old patterns that no longer serve their growth. Jung was particularly fascinated by the appearance of geometric patterns and mathematical symbols during cannabis experiences. People would see complex fractal patterns, sacred geometry, or numerical sequences that seemed to reveal the underlying mathematical structure of reality. These visions suggested to Jung that cannabis could provide access to what he called the archetypal layer of the psyche, the level of consciousness where universal patterns and cosmic principles are stored. Light symbolism is perhaps the most universal element of cannabis experiences. People consistently report seeing brilliant lights, experiencing themselves as beings of light, or feeling illuminated from within by divine radiance. Jung understood that these light experiences represented contact with what he called the self, the highest and most essential aspect of human consciousness. Color symbolism also plays a crucial role in cannabis experiences. Different colors carry specific psychological and spiritual meanings that Jung mapped extensively in his research. Purple and violet often represent spiritual transformation and connection to higher consciousness. Gold represents divine wisdom and enlightenment. Green connects to natural healing and heart-centered awareness. Blue represents peace, truth, and communication with higher realms. The most important thing Jung discovered about these symbolic experiences is that they're not just pretty pictures or interesting mental phenomena. Each symbol that appears during a cannabis journey carries specific psychological information and guidance that's directly relevant to your personal growth and spiritual development. These symbols are your unconscious mind's way of communicating important truths that can't be expressed in ordinary language. They provide guidance for life decisions, reveal hidden aspects of your personality, and offer solutions to problems you've been struggling with. Learning to understand and interpret these symbolic messages is one of the most valuable skills you can develop for making the most of cannabis experiences. By the way, if you're curious to go even deeper and integrate your shadows and light, check out the Sim Method ebook. It's a concise guide that can help you unlock your inner power in just 5 minutes a day. The link is in the first pinned comment below. 4. How to access your higher self through weed. Your higher self is the wisest, most loving, and most authentic version of who you are. The part of you that exists beyond fear, limitation, and social conditioning. Jung understood that cannabis could serve as a direct bridge to this elevated aspect of consciousness. but only when used with the right approach and intention. The first key to accessing your higher self through cannabis is setting a clear intention before you begin. Your higher self responds to genuine seeking and sincere questions about your life's purpose, relationships, and spiritual growth. Before using cannabis, spend time in quiet reflection, asking yourself what guidance you most need to receive. Create a sacred space for your journey by removing distractions, setting up comfortable surroundings, and treating the experience as a spiritual practice rather than recreational entertainment. Your higher self is more likely to emerge when you approach cannabis with reverence and respect, acknowledging its potential as a tool for spiritual development. Jung discovered that the higher self often communicates through sudden insights, intuitive knowing, and feelings of deep understanding that seem to come from beyond your normal thinking mind. During a cannabis experience, pay attention to thoughts that feel different from your usual mental chatter, ideas that carry a sense of truth, wisdom, or universal love. Your higher self might also communicate through what Jung called synchronicities, meaningful coincidences that seem to provide exactly the guidance you need at the perfect moment. While using cannabis, you might notice that songs, conversations, or even random events seem to contain personal messages that speak directly to your situation. One of the most effective ways to connect with your higher self through cannabis is by asking direct questions and then listening carefully for the answers. Your higher self doesn't communicate in the same argumentative, analytical way as your normal mind. Instead, it offers gentle guidance, loving perspectives, and wise counsel that feels both familiar and profoundly true. Physical sensations can also be messages from your higher self. You might feel waves of love flowing through your body, experience a sense of expansion in your heart area, or feel energy moving through your system in ways that provide information about your emotional and spiritual state. Jung noticed that people often experience what he called ego dissolution during deeper cannabis experiences, moments when their normal sense of separate selfhood temporarily dissolves and they experience themselves as part of a larger universal consciousness. These experiences provide direct contact with your higher self by removing the barriers that normally keep you identified with limited, fear-based thinking. Your higher self often reveals itself through an overwhelming sense of love and compassion that extends to yourself and all other beings. During cannabis experiences, people frequently report feeling unconditional love for family members they've had conflicts with, forgiveness for past mistakes, and deep acceptance of their own imperfections and humanity. Creative inspiration is another way your higher self communicates through cannabis. You might suddenly understand solutions to problems that have been bothering you, receive ideas for artistic projects, or gain clarity about life changes you need to make. Your higher self sees your life from a much broader perspective and can offer guidance that your normal thinking mind could never access. Dreams and visions that occur during or after cannabis use often contain messages from your higher self. Jung encouraged people to pay careful attention to any dreamlike images, stories, or symbolic experiences that emerge during their cannabis journeys, as these often contain important psychological and spiritual information. Your higher self also communicates through what Jung called numinous experiences, moments of contact with something sacred, divine, or holy that feels larger than your individual consciousness. These experiences might involve feeling the presence of spiritual beings, sensing the underlying unity of all existence, or experiencing yourself as an expression of universal love and creativity. The key to maintaining connection with your higher self through cannabis is learning to distinguish between the voice of your ego and the voice of your higher wisdom. Your ego speaks with fear, judgment, and limitation. Your higher self speaks with love, acceptance, and unlimited possibility, Practice surrendering control during your cannabis experiences instead of trying to direct or manipulate what happens. Your higher self emerges most easily when your ego relaxes its grip and allows deeper wisdom to flow through your consciousness without interference. Regular meditation, journaling, and spiritual practices can strengthen your connection to your higher self and make it easier to access this guidance through cannabis. The more you practice recognizing the voice of your higher wisdom in ordinary consciousness, the more clearly you'll be able to hear it during cannabis experiences. Remember that your higher self is not separate from who you are. It's the truest, most essential aspect of your being that exists beyond all temporary thoughts, emotions, and circumstances. Cannabis simply removes the mental static that usually prevents you from experiencing this deeper dimension of yourself. 5. The mysterious connection between marijuana and dreams. Jung considered dreams to be the royal road to the unconscious mind, and he discovered something remarkable about how cannabis affects the entire dreaming process. The relationship between marijuana and dreams goes far deeper than most people realize, involving profound changes to your sleep cycles, dream content, and ability to access unconscious wisdom. When you use cannabis regularly, you might notice that your dreams become less frequent or vivid while the substance is active in your system. This happens because cannabis affects the REM sleep stage, where most dreaming occurs. However, Jung understood that this temporary dream suppression often leads to what he called REM rebound, a powerful surge of intense dreaming that occurs when cannabis leaves your system. During these rebound periods, your dreams become extraordinarily vivid, emotional, and meaningful. Jung observed that these cannabis-influenced dreams often contained the same archetypal symbols and universal themes that appeared during waking cannabis experiences. Your unconscious mind seemed to be processing and integrating the insights gained during your cannabis journeys through the dream state. The most fascinating aspect of the cannabis-dream connection is how the plant seems to blur the boundaries between waking consciousness and the dream world. Many people report that their cannabis experiences feel dreamlike, while their dreams after cannabis use feel unusually real and significant. Jung discovered that cannabis could enhance what he called active imagination, a technique for consciously engaging with dreamlike imagery and symbolic content while awake. During cannabis experiences, you might find yourself in a state that combines the receptivity of dreaming with the awareness of waking consciousness, allowing you to actively participate in symbolic experiences and receive guidance from archetypal figures. This enhanced active imagination state explains why cannabis experiences often feel like guided journeys or meaningful adventures rather than just altered states of consciousness. Your mind enters a mode similar to lucid dreaming, where you're aware that something special is happening while remaining open to whatever wants to emerge from your unconscious. Cannabis also affects the content and themes of your dreams in specific ways. Jung noticed that people who used cannabis often reported dreams about flying, transformation, spiritual teachers, and encounters with divine or mystical beings. These dream themes match the content of their waking cannabis experiences, suggesting that the plant was opening the same archetypal channels during both states of consciousness. The plant seems to enhance your ability to remember and understand your dreams. Many people find that after using cannabis, they wake up with unusually clear recall of their dream experiences and strong intuitive understanding of what the dreams meant for their personal growth and spiritual development. Jung was particularly interested in what he called big dreams, especially meaningful dreams that seem to come from a transpersonal source and provide guidance for major life transitions. Cannabis appeared to increase the frequency of these significant dreams, perhaps by opening the dreamer's consciousness to deeper layers of archetypal wisdom. Another mysterious aspect of the cannabis-dream connection is how the plant can trigger what Jung called collective dreams. Dream experiences that seem to tap into universal themes and shared human experiences rather than just personal psychological material. These dreams often contain mythological elements, spiritual teachings, and cosmic insights that feel like they're coming from a source beyond individual consciousness. Cannabis use can also enhance your ability to work with dreams for healing and personal growth. The expanded awareness that comes from cannabis experiences makes it easier to understand the symbolic language of dreams and apply dream wisdom to waking life challenges. Many people discover that cannabis helps them access what Jung called compensatory dreams, dreams that balance out conscious attitudes and provide alternative perspectives on life situations. If you've been too serious, you might dream about play and spontaneity. If you've been too mental, you might dream about emotional expression or physical experiences. The timing of cannabis use in relation to sleep also affects the dreaming process in specific ways. Using cannabis several hours before bed often leads to more meaningful dreams than using it right before sleep. This suggests that the plant needs time to alter your consciousness before the dream state can be fully influenced. Jung observed that cannabis seemed to activate what he called the transcendent function, the psychological process that bridges conscious and unconscious content. This function operates naturally during dreams, but cannabis appeared to strengthen and enhance its operation, leading to more profound dream experiences and better integration of unconscious wisdom. The mysterious connection between cannabis and dreams ultimately points to something larger about the nature of consciousness itself. Jung understood that both dreaming and cannabis experiences involve similar alterations in how your mind processes information and accesses different layers of awareness. Both states involve a softening of ego boundaries, increased symbolic thinking, enhanced emotional processing, and greater openness to transpersonal experiences. Cannabis might work so well as a spiritual tool precisely because it mimics and enhances the same consciousness-expanding processes that occur naturally during dreaming. 6. The spiritual danger nobody tells you about. While cannabis can be a powerful tool for spiritual growth and psychological healing, Jung understood that it also carries specific risks that most people never hear about. These dangers aren't the ones typically discussed in anti-drug campaigns, but subtle spiritual and psychological traps that can derail genuine development and keep seekers stuck in illusion. The greatest spiritual danger of cannabis use is what Jung called spiritual materialism, the tendency to become attached to the experiences themselves rather than integrating their deeper teachings. When people become addicted to the feeling of expanded consciousness, they can lose sight of the real purpose of spiritual work, which is permanent transformation of character and consciousness. Jung observed that some cannabis users became what he termed spiritual tourists, people who could access profound states of consciousness but failed to bring the wisdom from these states into their everyday lives. They might have beautiful visions and mystical experiences during cannabis sessions, but remain stuck in the same limiting patterns, relationships, and behaviors when sober. Another major danger is the inflation of ego that can occur when people mistake temporary, expanded states for permanent enlightenment. Jung noticed that some cannabis users began to believe they were more spiritually advanced than others simply because they could access altered states of consciousness. This spiritual pride actually blocks genuine growth and keeps people trapped in subtle forms of self-deception. The risk of what Jung called psychic inflation is particularly dangerous because it feels so positive and convincing. People might feel like they've achieved great spiritual insights or made contact with divine beings, but if these experiences aren't balanced with humility and ongoing inner work, they can lead to grandiose delusions and disconnection from reality. Cannabis can also create dependency on external substances for spiritual experiences, preventing people from developing their natural capacity for meditation, prayer, and other practices that build genuine spiritual strength. When people rely too heavily on cannabis for accessing higher consciousness, they may never learn to reach these states through their own inner development. Jung was particularly concerned about what he called premature transcendence, the attempt to escape ordinary human challenges through spiritual experiences rather than facing them directly. Cannabis can sometimes be used as a sophisticated form of avoidance, allowing people to feel spiritually expanded while neglecting practical responsibilities and psychological growth work. The danger of spiritual bypassing is especially relevant for cannabis users. This involves using spiritual experiences and insights to avoid dealing with difficult emotions, unresolved trauma, or interpersonal conflicts. Someone might feel profound love and unity during a cannabis experience, but still struggle with anger, jealousy, or fear in their daily relationships. Another subtle danger is the tendency to mistake symbolic experiences for literal truth. Jung understood that cannabis often provides access to archetypal and mythological content that should be interpreted symbolically rather than taken as factual information about reality. When people start believing that their cannabis visions are literal encounters with gods, aliens, or other beings, they can lose their psychological balance and connection to ordinary reality. Cannabis can also amplify existing psychological imbalances rather than healing them. People with tendencies toward paranoia, anxiety, or depression might find these issues intensified during cannabis experiences, especially if they're not working with qualified guides or therapists who understand how to integrate challenging psychological material. The risk of what Jung called participation mystique is another concern. The loss of individual psychological boundaries that can occur during intense cannabis experiences. While temporary ego dissolution can be healing, ongoing confusion about personal identity and boundaries can interfere with healthy relationships and practical functioning. Jung also warned about the danger of becoming a puer aeternus, an eternal child who uses spiritual experiences to avoid the responsibilities of adult development. Cannabis can sometimes reinforce the desire to remain in a state of wonder and possibility without committing to the difficult work of building a mature, grounded life. Perhaps the most serious spiritual danger is using cannabis to avoid what Jung called the dark night of the soul, the inevitable periods of spiritual dryness, doubt, and challenge that are necessary parts of genuine spiritual development. When people use cannabis to maintain constant access to positive spiritual states, they might never develop the psychological strength that comes from working through difficult periods without external support. The solution to these dangers isn't avoiding cannabis entirely, but approaching it with what Jung called conscious suffering, the willingness to face difficult truths about yourself and do the ongoing inner work required for genuine transformation. Cannabis works best when it's part of a broader spiritual practice that includes meditation, therapy, honest self-examination, and service to others. Jung emphasized that any tool for consciousness expansion must be balanced with what he called opus contra naturam, work against your natural tendencies toward comfort, avoidance, and self-deception. Cannabis can support this work, but it can never replace the daily discipline and courage required for authentic spiritual development. The key is maintaining what Jung called the transcendent function, the ability to hold both expanded spiritual awareness and grounded practical wisdom simultaneously. When cannabis use is guided by this balanced perspective, it can serve genuine growth rather than becoming another form of spiritual escapism. 7. Sacred rituals to awaken your consciousness. Jung understood that cannabis worked most powerfully when used within a framework of sacred ritual and intentional practice. He observed that indigenous cultures had developed sophisticated ceremonial approaches to plant medicines that maximized their spiritual benefits while minimizing potential risks and negative effects. Creating a sacred container for your cannabis experience begins with what Jung called temenos, a protected psychological space where transformation can occur safely. This involves both external preparation of your physical environment and internal preparation of your mental and emotional state. Start by choosing a time when you won't be interrupted and can dedicate several hours to the experience. Turn off phones, clear your schedule, and let others know you're not available. Jung emphasized that spiritual work requires what he called concentrated attention, the ability to focus completely on inner experience without external distractions. Prepare your space with elements that support spiritual awareness. This might include candles, crystals, sacred images, or objects from nature. Jung noticed that certain visual elements could trigger archetypal responses and help guide consciousness toward deeper layers of awareness. The goal is creating an environment that signals to your unconscious mind that something sacred and meaningful is about to occur. Begin each cannabis ritual with what Jung called active imagination, a period of quiet reflection where you consciously connect with your intention for the experience. Ask yourself what guidance you most need to receive, what aspects of your life require healing or insight, or what questions you want to explore during your journey. Jung recommended starting cannabis rituals with some form of purification practice. This might involve taking a shower or bath, burning sage or other cleansing herbs, or simply spending time in meditation to clear your mind of daily concerns and mundane thoughts. Set a clear intention for your experience by speaking aloud or writing down what you hope to learn or accomplish during your cannabis journey. Jung discovered that the unconscious mind responds powerfully to conscious intention, and that stating your purpose clearly helps direct the experience toward meaningful content rather than random mental wandering. Create what Jung called a ritual attitude by approaching cannabis with reverence and respect rather than casual entertainment. This might involve saying a prayer, expressing gratitude for the plant and its teachings, or acknowledging your intention to use this tool for spiritual growth and healing. During the experience itself, Jung recommended maintaining what he called watchful waiting, a state of alert receptivity where you remain open to whatever wants to emerge from your unconscious without trying to control or direct the process. This involves balancing active attention with passive surrender. Keep a journal nearby to record insights, visions, and guidance that emerge during your experience. Jung emphasized that much of the value of consciousness-expanding experiences comes from integration and practical application of the wisdom received. Writing helps preserve important insights that might otherwise fade from memory. Practice what Jung called amplification, the process of exploring and expanding on symbolic images or insights that arise during your cannabis experience. If you see a particular animal, color, or geometric pattern, spend time contemplating what it might represent in your personal psychology and spiritual development. Include periods of silence and stillness in your cannabis ritual. Jung observed that the most profound insights often emerge during quiet moments when the mind stops actively seeking and simply allows deeper wisdom to surface naturally. End your cannabis ritual with what Jung called integration work, conscious reflection on what you experienced and how it applies to your everyday life. This might involve journaling about insights received, making commitments to specific changes or actions, or simply sitting in gratitude for the guidance you received. Jung recommended creating what he called transitional rituals to help you move consciously from expanded states back to ordinary consciousness. This might involve drinking tea, eating something nourishing, or spending time in nature to help ground and integrate your experience. Follow up your cannabis rituals with ongoing practices that support integration of the insights received. Jung emphasized that spiritual experiences only become meaningful when they lead to concrete changes in how you think, feel, and behave in daily life. Consider working with what Jung called active imagination techniques during your cannabis experiences, consciously dialoguing with archetypal figures, exploring symbolic landscapes, or asking for guidance from inner wisdom figures that appear during your journey. Jung also recommended creating regular cannabis rituals rather than using the plant randomly or impulsively. Establishing a consistent practice helps develop your capacity to work skillfully with expanded states of consciousness and builds a relationship with the plant as a spiritual ally rather than just a recreational substance. Remember that the most powerful cannabis rituals often involve some form of service or dedication to something larger than yourself. Jung observed that consciousness expansion becomes most meaningful when it's directed toward healing, growth, and contributing to the well-being of others rather than just personal pleasure or escape. 8. The final truth about cannabis and enlightenment. After decades of research into consciousness, spirituality, and human psychology, Jung reached a profound conclusion about cannabis and enlightenment that challenges both traditional religious views and modern recreational attitudes toward the plant. His final truth reveals both the ultimate potential and the fundamental limitations of using cannabis as a spiritual tool. Jung discovered that cannabis could indeed provide genuine glimpses of enlightened consciousness, states of unity, unconditional love, and direct knowing that matched descriptions found in the world's great mystical traditions. However, he also understood that these glimpses were temporary openings rather than permanent achievements, and that mistaking them for actual enlightenment could become a major obstacle to real spiritual development. The final truth is that cannabis serves as what Jung called a spiritual catalyst, a substance that can accelerate psychological and spiritual processes that would otherwise take years or decades to unfold naturally. Like a powerful telescope that allows you to see distant stars, cannabis can provide clear views of enlightened states that exist within your consciousness, but are normally hidden beneath layers of mental conditioning and ego identification. Jung realized that true enlightenment isn't a peak experience or altered state of consciousness, but a permanent transformation in how you relate to yourself, others, and reality. Enlightenment involves the complete integration of conscious and unconscious aspects of the psyche, resulting in what he called individuation, the full realization of your authentic self. Cannabis can support this individuation process by providing access to unconscious content, archetypal wisdom, and transpersonal perspectives that are essential for psychological wholeness. However, Jung understood that the real work of enlightenment happens in ordinary consciousness through the patient integration of these insights into daily life, relationships, and practical responsibilities. The plant reveals what Jung called the self, the transcendent aspect of human consciousness that exists beyond ego limitations and connects each individual to universal wisdom and love. During cannabis experiences, people often feel this self as an overwhelming presence of peace, joy, and unconditional acceptance that seems more real and true than their ordinary sense of identity. Jung's final understanding was that cannabis doesn't create enlightenment, but rather removes the barriers that prevent you from experiencing your already enlightened nature. The expanded awareness, cosmic consciousness, and divine love that people experience during cannabis journeys aren't foreign states being added to their consciousness, but the natural condition of human awareness when it's freed from fear, judgment, and separation. However, Jung also recognized the crucial distinction between experiencing enlightenment and embodying it. Many cannabis users have profound spiritual experiences but continue to struggle with the same psychological patterns, relationship difficulties, and life challenges that existed before their cannabis journey. This gap between spiritual insight and practical transformation represents the fundamental challenge of working with consciousness-expanding substances. The final truth about cannabis and enlightenment is that the plant works best as what Jung called a preparatory practice, a tool that can show you the destination of spiritual development while requiring other practices to actually complete the journey. Cannabis can reveal your Buddha nature, your Christ consciousness, or your divine self, but realizing these potentials requires ongoing commitment to meditation, therapy, service, and other forms of inner work. Jung understood that authentic enlightenment involves what he called the union of opposites, the ability to hold both transcendent spiritual awareness and grounded human wisdom simultaneously. Cannabis can provide access to transcendent states, but achieving stable integration of these states with ordinary consciousness requires years of dedicated practice and psychological development. Perhaps the most important aspect of Jung's final truth is his recognition that cannabis enlightenment experiences serve their highest purpose when they inspire people to commit more deeply to genuine spiritual practice rather than becoming ends in themselves. The plant can show you what's possible for human consciousness, but only consistent inner work can make those possibilities into permanent realities. Jung also discovered that cannabis could accelerate what he called the confrontation with the shadow, the necessary psychological work of facing and integrating rejected aspects of yourself. True enlightenment requires embracing your complete humanity, including the parts you'd rather ignore or deny. The final truth reveals that cannabis works most powerfully when approached with what Jung called conscious participation. The understanding that you're working with a plant teacher that can provide guidance and healing, but that the real transformation depends on your willingness to do the difficult work of changing your thoughts, behaviors, and ways of relating to the world. Jung's ultimate insight was that cannabis and enlightenment are both pointing toward the same fundamental truth, that human consciousness is already connected to infinite wisdom, unconditional love, and creative potential, and that spiritual development is really about removing the illusions that keep us from experiencing this natural state of being. The plant can serve as a powerful reminder of who you really are, beneath all the social conditioning and psychological limitations, but becoming that authentic self in everyday life remains the great work of human existence that no substance can complete for you.